Discover new mind and body hacks to thrive as a human today. The Institute for Aliveness is here to teach you all the things you never learned in school. From talking poop, sex, childhood trauma, emotional intelligence, psychedelics, and of course, fasting and food. This is a podcast that changes lives. Join your host, Dr. Andrea Page, as she travels 7 continents to find the most captivating, impactful humans for you.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to a new season of the podcast. This season, I bring you some of the most important embodied people in my life. From all over the world, people I've met along my journey, I thought, hey, why not share them with the world? The following is a conversation with Lucy Bradley, master herbalist practicing in Glasgow. Lucy and I met in our master's program, and this was our first catch-up after many years of not too much communication. So tune in to hear about Lucy's story and where it's led her, as well as towards the end when we get really meta and kind of hack the issues with health today. This will definitely be one that you'll want to listen all the way through.
Sounds like my ideal conversation to start the day.
Good morning. So, all right. So, Luce, you and I met 7 years ago in our Masters of Science in Ethnobotany at the University of Kent in Canterbury. And quickly fell into enjoying each other's company and learning with and from each other. And I know a lot has changed in your life since then, going back to Africa, not only for your master's field research with the Maasai, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But also having a child and birthing a new little soul into the world. And you've been in mommy world, as well as really setting up a space that's your own there in Glasgow, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like solidifying your feet on the ground as a herbalist, and you are undoubtedly one of the best herbalists I know. And so if anyone's in Glasgow, there's that. But for
worldwide, I treat
who's
remotely as well. Come on, let's not limit it.
very good.
Yeah.
I love it. Very good. So worldwide, fits in on how you would, let's say, phrase your background or describe yourself, or really put into words the bias that you're speaking from.
So, I'm so glad to be reconnecting with you as well. I always knew that our lives had some kind of parallelism in it with the work that you do and the work that I do. So that's cool to be reconnecting. It's really interesting because I think that my bias has definitely changed over the past 2 decades, because I come from a very conservative family, and very kind of heteronormative and conforming. You know, there's nothing about my mum and dad that are pushing boundaries too much. And a really academic background. I went to a private school from being 4 years old, and just kind of led my life as I was told to, and then did sciences at A level. So very much like everything that I had learned up until being kind of 20 was very much based in academia, and that's what was true, and that's what was real, and biology was at the basis of everything. And then when I was 18, I decided to take a gap year rather than going straight to university, and I went to New Zealand. And for some reason, I had said to the people with whom I did my gap year, just send me to the kind of most extreme placement that you've got, without knowing what that would be. And then they put me at the oldest Maori boarding school in New Zealand. So I went from like this white, heteronormative, conservative academic background to being like, just so deep in Maori culture and what they were doing a lot of at that school. And why I'm talking about this is because I was telling someone about it the other day, and it made me realize that was really pivotal for me in terms of changing like my worldview basically, and they were all about
Mm-hmm.
being connected with nature and living there, trying to reconnect the kids to their ancestry and their history, politically, environmentally, biologically, on every level. So I did so many amazing things with them, and it really sparked something in me. And one particular moment that I remember was we did this 10-day bush hike. We were in the middle of the bush, like we walked in and we walked out, and we visited some marae, which is like the homestead, and they were deep in the bush. And at one particular homestead, they did their kids did a haka, which is their traditional song and dance.
Mm-hmm.
And all the people from the marae, all the men and women from the marae in the bush joined in, and it was like some kind of sacred ceremony. I can still see it in my mind's eye, and the kind of goosebumps that I got from that, and this sense of something else kind of came to life. And I started to understand that health was not just about the physical health of the human, but the health of the community and the people around them. So whoever you surround yourself with and whatever environment you're in, that dictates how your physical, emotional, and mental health is going to be. And that also that the health of an individual can be positively influenced by the good health of others around them, and it was that kind of started to change things and drove me more towards being interested in people, whereas previously I'd been kind of like, oh, animals and biology. Anyway, I went on to study to do a 3-year degree in zoology at Leeds University, and it was a bit of a catapult going from being with those people in New Zealand that I felt such a deep connection with, like that it triggered something deeper in me that I hadn't previously been aware of. And then going back to university at 19 was kind of like, what the hell am I doing here? Anyway, I did love studying zoology because what I remember kind of is like systems ecology. That was the kind of thing that really got me thinking and really got me going. Like, and even when people talk about biology, I just heard something this morning from one of my daughter's cartoons that she's watching. Like, the thing about biology and what's interesting is they talk about the importance of connection between species. So ecological dependency, so you need one species in order to maintain another, which then has a knock-on effect. So through biology, even though it's a science, they talk about interconnection, and a lot of people know that and understand that and can rationalize that, yet they can't contextualize that in themselves. They still like have this reduced attitude about themselves and their health. So I really enjoyed studying biology, and I just immersed myself in it as much as possible, dreaming of Africa. I remember saying to my dad, I'm going to go and be a zoologist in the Serengeti. I had a real thing about big mammals, and my dad said to me, over my dead body.
And how
So
does that make you feel?
well, it just makes me laugh because at the time I was like, yeah, maybe that's not a so sensible idea, but I never let it go. I never, and it never went from me. And completed my degree, and in the last year of my degree, I went and worked on an organic farm in California, in South California. And that was another one of those moments in my life where I kind of reconnected with people and saw something different. And at that point, I then started to see like connections between humans and the land, because of course when you're working on an organic farm you can't help but see that. And being in California, that people's attitudes are so different to British attitudes in terms of like what's possible. And it was the first time I really got exposed to alternative modalities of health. And it's just kind of like this 20-year-old wide-eyed girl going, oh my god, I didn't even know about any of this stuff. And the people who run the farm were really, they I attribute where I am now to them, because they made me realize that you could have autonomy over your health. Because they knew, they never visited doctors, they never, they just didn't have anything to do with that kind of stuff. They always, whenever they had a physical problem, they thought about their spiritual well-being and what was going on around them. And so they took a totally different approach, and they were really, really into herbs, and they were really into basically everything natural. They used loads of different modalities. They were really into chanting. I can't quite remember what it was, but they practiced or followed a specific kind of Indian religion. They practiced yoga, they did chanting and meditation, and they looked after their spiritual health. And that was the first time that I'd really met people that were interested in looking after their emotional and spiritual health, as well as their physical health, that was as equally as important. And yeah, it was cool, because I just realized, oh my God, I need to have control over my own body, and I need to have control over my own health. And I was getting into looking at my own health as well. I'd had some underlying chronic health issues since being about 16. And that being in California then gave me the confidence when I came back to the UK to finish my final year at university, to then be like, do you know what, I'm going to sort this out myself. Like, the options that I've been given by the doctor aren't good enough, and it's not working, and this problem is not just a physical problem. So then I started getting into body work. I started getting massage. That was another kind of transformation, and using herbs. And I bought my first book on herbal medicine, and I just, it was like, I opened it and I was just like, yes, this is it. This is it.
I
And I
love
remember
it.
just thinking, oh my God, like, I've studied biology, through school. Yeah, I've never thought about medicinal plants. Like, no one had ever told me about medicinal plants. And yeah, it was just like this. Yeah, it was amazing. And I started sorting out my own health problems. Ironically, I did go to see a herbalist, and I really didn't like them, and I really didn't like how they worked, because it was so, I felt like it was so superficial. What they were doing was that they were just trying to provide me with a herbal alternative to the pharmaceuticals. And even though I didn't know it at the time, that was not what I was interested in. I wanted to go deeper, look at deeper imbalances that were contributing towards my physical health symptoms. So that was it. And then I finished my university, and I kind of had an idea that lots of people were saying, oh, zoology, you're not going to be able to get into that in Africa. It's extremely competitive. You need to do internships. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I was thinking, nah, I'm not going to do that. But I was like, but I am going to study herbal medicine. I just decided one day, like, I realized that you could be a professional herbalist. It was like a light bulb moment. And then I looked on the internet, studying herbal medicine UK, and this course came up in Glasgow, and I just read through it, and everything that it said, I was like, yep, yep, yep. Even though I had no idea what that would be like. So there and then, to age 23, I just decided to apply, and I got a place. And yeah, age 24, I started doing my herbal medicine degree, and yeah, maybe the rest is history. It was an incredibly intense 4 years because the school that I studied at, called the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine, which unfortunately is no longer here, they integrated science with art. So they really took that. They took those two approaches, and I was at a huge advantage, right? Because I'd done science A levels, I'd done a bachelor's degree, a science degree, so I was really, it was easy for me to do that in terms of the science stuff, but everything else, oh my God, I was just like, what the hell are these people talking about? All the energetic stuff, the food and nutrition. And the more we also studied, they incorporated into our training uh, Ayurvedic medicine. So we had to do components of training in Ayurvedic medicine. We had to study traditional Chinese medicine. We had to study Galenic medicine. And then we also did what's called Goethean science. So we were looking at plants through our embodied experience. So every single plant that we learnt about, we did what's called a sensory tea tasting. And it was like connecting with your intuition. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I am no good at this. I don't know how to do this. I'm not intuitive. I'm not kind of all of these things. I was not, because of the background that I came from, but it was like because of those other experiences that I'd had. It was like that little bit of me was like trying to go, I'm here, but I wasn't listening. And the more that we did those sensory tastings, the more that became really important to me. And I started to realize about the knowledge that we had inside of ourselves about medicinal plants, and how powerful that was, and how easy it was to learn about plants through this technique. So, so then plants, that was it. Like plants then became the route through which I explored life, I guess, and qualified 2008. And then, surprise, surprise, guess what happened? Africa popped its head up again, and by chance I got an opportunity to go to Tanzania in East Africa with another organisation teaching about first aid. And I was at a fair trying to promote my business, and there was Africa going, come to me. So yeah, I went to Tanzania and taught first aid in a really rural area. And what struck me most was just how poorly people were. And I had this preconceived idea that they had a very strong practice of traditional medicine. So it's like, well, why aren't you using this? Like, why aren't people using herbs? Why don't people have autonomy over their health? And then like linking that into like political history, I started to understand why people were so sick. And I decided that I wanted to find out everything that I could about herbal remedies that were being used in Africa for treating things like typhoid, cholera, malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, skin problems, digestive disorders. And that was it. Something just twigged the first time that I went to Tanzania. Something again got sparked in me that I was like, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. This is where my greatest passion lies. And it was like that experience of another culture similar to the one that I'd had in New Zealand that was just like, this is what has been missing from my life, that I hadn't had this kind of cultural experience or something deeper in myself that wanted that I hadn't got from my own European lifestyle. And so I contacted loads of people and said, what do you know about medicinal plants in Africa? And as it turns out, someone at the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine had done their thesis on Artemisia annua, which is a herb that treats malaria. It's a Chinese herb that treats malaria. And I was like, what? And so there all of a sudden was all this information from people that I knew, and it just was so easy for me to get into that. And this lady, Jenny, who'd written her thesis, she'd actually been a nurse in Tanzania for 25 years, a missionary nurse. And she had close links with lots of people who were working in sustainable development with medicinal plants. And she was just like, I'll just connect them to you. And that for me was really unusual, because that's not how it works in Britain. Like, it's not, you don't just, it's like you have to work for your connections, whereas in Tanzania, she just was like, don't worry, just email these people and they will get back to you and they'll be interested. And I was like, okay. And I did. And they were just so welcoming. And they were like, oh, that's so cool that you're a medical herbalist. And I got connected with this organization called Action for Natural Medicine, ANAMED, and they're a charitable organization based in Germany. And they are kind of leading the field in sustainable development through herbal medicine and medicinal plants. And I just emailed them, this guy called Keith, and just emailed him and explained what I'd been doing and what I was interested in, and he emailed me back, and I just said to him in the email, I want to come and work for you. And he emailed me back and he said, do you want to go to Zimbabwe? Do you want to go to Zimbabwe next year? And I was just like, yes, I do. And I remember I was living in Edinburgh at the time, and I remember sitting in a vegetarian cafe called Henderson's, reading that email and literally like jumping at my seat, like thinking, this is it. Like what an incredible experience as a medical herbalist, as a Western trained medical herbalist, to then be able to go and work with and teach with traditional healers, shamans, doctors, nurses, priests, people working within the church. And I just was so excited. I remember phoning my mum and saying to her, I'm going to Zimbabwe. And she was just like, this is fantastic. And so I'd already had a trip planned back to Tanzania. I'd done 2 trips by then, actually. And that was just doing it, like just connecting with people who were working in community projects, predominantly growing Artemisia, growing and propagating, harvesting and processing Artemisia annua. And it was amazing because not only when I did that field trip to do the research that I wanted to find out more, not only were the people super welcoming and it was really easy to meet people and get connected into that, they had a lot of respect for me because I was a Western trained herbalist. So they just were like, yeah, I was emulated to the status of doctor immediately, which was because my experience in the UK was like, what's herbal medicine? This chronic battle between saying to people, what's a herbalist? I don't even know what that is. You're some kind of witch who lives in the woods wearing tie-dye. And compared to Africa, where people were incredibly respectful and interested. And they let me, like doctors who were working in an integrated way with herbal medicine would let me sit in on their clinical practice and were asking me for advice from kind of a Western perspective. And I was just like, holy smoke, like this is great. Like the amount, I'd spent 4 years studying. We did a minimum of 600 hours of clinical training during my herbal medicine degree. But the amount that I learned in that one field trip to Africa, being with people and witnessing their clinical practice, was just like so much more than what I'd learned academically. So like that, I kind of felt like the learning really began. And so I started teaching with Animed and travelled to Malawi. I was running seminars in Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya. And just had the most incredible, inspiring time. And it wasn't just about teaching about herbal medicine. It was about working with people and listening to people's stories and understanding cultural context, and that whole thing that links back to my first trip to New Zealand about the health of the people was an ecological issue as well as a spiritual and community issue. Like that, what I had learned up until then about what poverty was, what absence of health was, those boundaries were really being pushed. So I started to really reframe how I was thinking about things, and I got mad into African political history. I just was like devouring books about African political history to get a better understanding about what was going on. So then I started to understand so much more about ill health from a political context, which links back to the need for autonomy, the need for health autonomy. And then that led to my master's degree. I remember being in Zimbabwe and talking to these group of women. All the people who had worked for Animed previously were men. So they were missing out on this whole side of health relating to women and children, because predominantly in Africa, it's the women and children. Like women's health is not spoken about with men. It's just not part and parcel of it. And there's so many things I was saying to Keith. Oh, I just found out about this. Oh, I just found out about that. What do you know about this? And he was like, in the however many years he'd been doing that, 20 something years that he'd been doing that, he had never heard or thought about some of the things relating to women and children. And he was like, Lucy, this is really special because now we're starting to learn a lot more about how we need to work with women as well. And that catalyzed conversations and relationships among lots of other people working for Animed, who were then relating to women, and the women started talking more about their health problems. And interestingly, like Artemisia annua is not just an anti-malarial plant, it's an anti-tumor plant as well. It also improves the function of the reproductive system too. So it was coming to light that lots of women were having reproductive issues, particularly relating to, well, people were saying that it was to do with the chemicals that were being used. So it was causing things like uterine fibroids and hormone imbalance and infertility, and that this was more of an issue than they had realized. But that they already had this amazing medicinal plant, Artemisia annua, to use that. And a lot of the women were already using that, but they hadn't been telling Animed that's what they were using it for. Just kind of come to their through their own observations, because they were taking Artemisia annua for treating malaria and for keeping their general health good. But because of the way in which it works with the liver and the blood, they were noticing that their menstrual cycle was improving, or that their menstrual problems were being alleviated as a consequence of taking the Artemisia annua. And then they were working with women who were having difficulties getting pregnant, were saying we're getting pregnant. People were having less menstrual bleeding issues relating to fibroids, etc. So it just went on and on. And I was really interested in people's stories. Like it's always been about people's stories, listening to stories. And in Zimbabwe on that particular trip, I just couldn't get enough of their stories and started interviewing people, because I knew that, like, in a group setting, it wasn't enough. I wasn't getting enough information. I wasn't able to have that one-to-one connection with them, which was what was needed to delve into their story. And so I started interviewing people, and particularly relating to their health, but of course everything else comes up too. And it was kind of like doing a herbal consultation, so it was easy for me to do that, but it wasn't just about their specific health problems. It was about plants that they were using, cultural practices that they were using that maybe we didn't know about. And I kind of was telling Keith, I'm doing this, I'm collecting these interviews and typing them up, and I'm just learning so much. I came back to the UK and was telling people, was doing like quite a lot of promotional work for Animed, because lots of herbalists in the UK didn't know that they existed and that they were doing this kind of community development work overseas. And someone had said to me, do you know that that's ethnobotany? And I was like, this is just herbalism. Like, this is herbalism, because herbalism was always so much more than just sitting with a patient and learning about their health issues. The paradigm is totally different from Western allopathic medicine. The story is part and parcel of the kind of herbalist paradigm. And then I looked up ethnobotany and started reading loads of ethnobotanical books, and started getting into Wade Davis and Mark Plotkin and Richard Evans Schultz, and lots of people who'd been doing ethnobotanical work. And then I was like, I need to study. I need to formalize this. I thought, coming back to being brought up in this really normative way where things are rationalized through academic study, I was like, I'm gonna take this further and do a master's degree. So I did. That's where I met you.
I love it. And then do you want to give a fast forward on the past 7-8 years?
Yeah, so my daughter was born. So during my field work in Tanzania, so I decided to do my field work. Obviously, Africa had become a big thing for me, and African medicinal plants, was kind of the field that I wanted to explore the most. So I decided to do my thesis research in Tanzania on the transmission of knowledge amongst ethnic minorities, the factors influencing how medicinal plant knowledge was transmitted through youth. And I met the father of my daughter, and without knowing that we were going to have a baby together. And so kind of just started to decide, you know what, this is where I want to be. Tanzania is really where I want to have my life, and this is what I want to be doing, kind of herbalism mixed with ethnobotany. I didn't want to be in clinical practice. I just didn't. Clinical practice wasn't the clinical practice in the way in which I knew it wasn't what I wanted. And so I kind of thought I'll do that. And as I was completing my thesis research in Tanzania, I also attended a permaculture training. I did a permaculture diploma on the permaculture diploma because I was asking them, why don't you teach about medicinal plants?
So funny.
And the teacher, who is American, this really cool guy called Steve Whitman, was like, of course we want to learn about medicinal plants, like it's so important ecologically, and how the model of permaculture is a really good model to use for health and for life in general. Like lots of people have been doing work about permaculture principles can help relationships. And so it was, the application of permaculture was much broader than I thought it was. And it happened to be that the organisation who ran the permaculture diploma were an organisation called Food, Water, Shelter. And I actually ended up getting a job with them as their project manager. So once I completed my master's thesis, I then just packed everything up, decided to leave the UK and went to Tanzania and to do this project management position, which was an incredible opportunity, kind of way beyond what I had the skill set for, but I was pretty keen to get some different experience. So I did that, got pregnant, had my daughter, and she had the first year of her life out there, and we were organising permaculture trainings. We were doing teaching on herbal medicine, project management. After some time, my personal health really started to deteriorate, as it would as a first-time mum, and doing a full-time job as a project manager in a third sector. I learnt a lot in that time. And I decided after a year that my health was suffering too much, so I needed to come back to the UK. Things weren't going well in lots of other ways in my life, so I kind of just thought I needed to get out in order to look after myself. So I came back to the UK, basically destitute. Had no direction. My physical, mental health was terrible. Had a 12-month-old baby, was by myself, and still had all my training and expertise though. So just slowly decided to get back into clinical practice, but from a totally different perspective. That my understanding of health had really changed and what was important. And so set up my clinical practice again 2015, and dedicated my time to just being in clinical practice almost full time, and started working. Something had changed from being a project manager as well, because I really got into entrepreneurship as well, and business was much more business minded. I think that doing the project management job gave me a lot of the skills that I hadn't got in my herbal medicine training, because although I was a clinical practitioner, I had no idea how to run a business and finances and stuff like that. And the project management really gave me a solid foundation in that. So I came back in a kind of win-win situation. So really started looking at business, and the main thing that struck me was to really get the message of herbal medicine out there, and the education. And it came back to autonomy, to wanting people to have autonomy. And I felt like the only way that could be achieved was through education, really dedicating time to education, and built up an apothecary. So built up a big herbal dispensary, lived in a tiny little flat at the time, and was just buying more and more tinctures to be able to supply people and to get herbal medicine out there. And that just grew and grew and grew. until last year I developed a product range because so many people were saying that they didn't want to take pharmaceutical medicine, but what was the alternative? So here I am now in this position whereby I have a clinical practice. I have a pre-packaged range of therapeutic grade herbal medicines, and yeah, just doing loads of educational workshops and seminars. I'm running an online herb course that's launching in August, just to show people, like, it's not just that there's an alternative, that there's a different paradigm, a different lens through which we can look at health.
I love it. I love it. I love it all. I mean, there was so much there. Thank you.
It's a good story, right?
It's a great story. It's a great story. And I think the first thing that I want to kind of awaken people to who are listening to this is our own ability to see what one could call a hero's journey, or just really our life trajectory of where we come from in terms of what we've been exposed to earlier in life, of our own kind of memoir-based realization of each step on our path, of how we perceived the world at that time versus now. And then that mixed in to like an innate petchance or a knowing that you had, whether it was Africa or whether it was the interconnectedness of all beings that you first found through animals, whatever it was, that like these were symbols. They were foreshadowing more or less in your life. And so for all of us listening to your story, Lucy, it's this powerful ability to step back and hear yours, and then hopefully reflect on our own hero's journey and our own memoir story, if you will. And so, yeah, so I guess I want to acknowledge that first and thank you. And it's
and you know, it's really
beautiful to hear.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that is that I often ask patients, why did you choose herbal medicine? And they recount similar stories, you know, like something like, oh, my granddad had an allotment and, you know, that was my happiest place. And they always say, I just knew, you know. And something that is really important to me at the moment, and something that I'm doing more and more of, is the kind of workshops that I do are based around your innate knowledge of medicinal plants, based on the fact that we co-evolved with medicinal plants. So we have specific receptor cells in our bodies for chemical constituents that are only present in medicinal plants, you know. And that doing the sensory tea tastings as a workshop or as an experience is so powerful, because it allows people, brings into their conscious mind that connection and that knowing that they had all along, and that now they can trust it because they have an embodied experience of it. You know, it's that interesting thing between knowing intellectually or cerebrally, and then really knowing, like really feeling it in your body and it being part of you.
Yes. So this is where our work crosses. This is the heart of it, because that's been my entire career, whether it's consulting in emotional intelligence or whether it's understanding about what's good for you, quote unquote, of making it embodied and giving people the portals to be able to experience it from their own experience rather than knowledge, which is someone else's wisdom, start to accrue their own wisdom through experience. And so 100%. And I mean, like, I'm eating actually bitter herbs right now, and I'm thinking of you because I remember that time when we were like sitting in my steps, I think in Canterbury, and you told me, like, you can't just swallow the bitter herbs, that part of the experience, it must have been about Artemisia or something, that part of the experience of the healing is imbibing the bitterness, that's what secretes, right, bile from the gallbladder and begins, quote unquote, the digestive juices to flow. And so in that kind of example, eating the bitter herbs, if they're in a salad earlier on, like there's a whole, not only sensory, oral, perceptive, but then medicinal is the outcome of that experience. And I think a lot of the isolation stemmed from pharmaceutical allopathy, where, you know, it's made in a laboratory. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your psyche. It has nothing to do with your physical body or how you're doing it. You just must take with food or whatever it says. It's not like take with food when under the care of someone who loves you. You know, and so your emphasis on the environmental aspect of health is of course of the utmost, and anyone listening to this podcast definitely is attuned to that from everything else that they've listened to. And yeah, so I love that. And I remember you telling me about the tasting experiences that you had and your own journey through that, and it's like your own awakening is what is now allowing you to have and hold that space of awakening for others.
Absolutely. And that's like, I think that's what makes me unique in terms of being a clinical practitioner, because the way that I practice is about, oh, my daughter's here just on a call. Yeah. So part of it is saying to the patient, you tell me what's going on for you, and you tell me what your body is trying to tell you, and I can help you to reveal that, because I don't know. I am not you. I don't know what your body, like, I can help you to interpret or potentially give some indication of potentially what's going on, because I have a different set of language and a different set of skills that allows me to inform you, to give you a different piece of information. And as soon as they receive that information, they always say that makes total sense. And it's about it's then with allopathic doctors, they're not using different language, they're not listening to the patient, they're not waiting for feedback. And this is the thing with using herbal medicine and this kind of paradigm in which I work, that it's about listening. And I say to the patient, I'm going to give you these herbs. I don't know what's going to happen. I know what those herbs can do, but specifically to you and your system, I don't know what's going to happen. So let's wait and see. And, that requires so much trust. And that is amazing that people can let me have that trust, and me trusting them to say, like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm here for you. But also that when they come back with feedback about the herbs, what they learn just from the feedback that they get from taking the herbs is transformative. Because it's not just about the herbs doing their work, which they do so powerfully. It's about that person reconnecting with whatever it is, or listening deeper to what it is that their body is trying to tell them through an embodied. It's like most people come to me when they're kind of at the end of the road, or they just, it's the picture's too kind of tangled and messy, and they don't understand what's going on anymore, and I just kind of defragment it for them and break it down, and then allow them to listen, and then they start to understand.
100%. Like, this is the story that I've been singing for years, and literally the introduction to the podcast for the first 4 seasons was, your body is talking, let's listen. And
right.
Like, that is, it's the underlying premise in all of this. And in hearing you say this now, what's coming up for me is, I'm going to go really meta, everyone. So big picture perspective, come with me here. That this trust that you and I sell effectively, because with me, it's fasting. I have such deep trust in the human body's ability to heal itself if given the time and space to do so through the process of fasting. And so thereby, that's what I'm selling, is my trust in fasting. I will stay here with you. And every time your mind and your dogmatic conditioning of an allopathic, mechanical view of the body comes up, I will hold you in my connection to the wisdom of your body, right? So I am effectively selling that trust. And so then what comes from that is, this is the meta part, understanding that actually the disease, because in my naturopathy training, we have unity of cure and unity of disease, that there's really only one thing that's wrong, and there's really only one way to fix it. And so that thing that's wrong is what I'll get to metally, but the thing to fix it is allowing it to come back to balance. So whether that's through fasting, or allowing the plants to fill in what's not filled in, or seducing from the body what it wants, or however kind of reconnection to nature, whether that's natural state of being through fasting, or whether that's actual nature through herbal medicine, or through being out in the sunshine, or through taking an air bath, or it's like that's nature cure, which is my route. But coming into it with that understanding of maybe, maybe the disease of humanity is this lack of trust. Because trust is what's given in any kind of indigenous society as a deeper reason for being, a purpose. So religion feeds this to us on a judgmental, superficial level today, especially Judeo-Christian religions. Whereas in the past, you had religion imbibed throughout the culture and there was no ability to separate. And so you were living in this space of trust. You had purpose to be, and you were here, right? We're trained anthropologists, so we know this very well. It's something that I try to reconnect people to. Purpose and tribe through astrology. That's a lot of my astrology practice and medical astrology practice, and it's psychosomatic as much as anything else. But regrounding people in an ability to trust, which is why we're so stressed today, because we want to control everything. We want to make sure it's right. We think it's all a gamble, right? That like fate or fortune, that kind of discussion is such a disembodiment of purpose and self and an experience of a spiritual being on this planet, whether it's an animal being or a human being. And so if that's what's at our root, then maybe just the process of going through fasting, in my case, or going through herbs and seeing that they have an effect, in your case, is rebuilding that trust, whatever that trust may be.
I love it.
So that's my little meta lecture.
I love it. And it's it just kind of opens up the conversation further, because always when people are coming to me for herbal therapy, they have to abstain. Like they have to cut the shit out of their lives, and that has to be food, and it has to be relationships, and it's about them coming back to themselves. It's about this space being created, and it is. And I hadn't really considered that about the trust, but it's such an important part of it, to that you will be supported. And a lot of my patients say, like, no one has ever listened like you have. No one has ever held me like you have. And I don't mean physically held them, that they've never felt that supported to find their own way to health. And I definitely am not like it's my way or the highway. I'm like, you have to find your way and I will help you, and I do believe that everybody who comes to me for a reason, that they have been drawn to me and I've been drawn to them, and that's part and parcel of that is building this relationship. And something that you had said the other day when we talked, was about oh God, now it's just popped out of my head, but about this journey like through trust,
right? Becoming the lawyer or the doctor, or having the 1.5 kids and the white picket fence. And this is not at all how, we could romanticize it and say ancient cultures perceived success, or we could just say any kind of communal based, non-individualistic culture perceived success. It would be success within the community, that the community itself was healthy and that the community itself raised itself up, not only in the level of health, but in their ability to communicate with one another, which we could call emotional intelligence, as well as their ability to take care and steward the environment in which they lived. And so when we see people in cities today who are cloistered up in apartments, sick, on half a medicine cabinet of pharmaceuticals, walking around in city streets that are polluted in one way or another. And right, the listenership of this podcast is highly international. So, people living in Bombay or Chengdu are hearing a very different variety of what's outside than people living in Zurich or Singapore even. And so just like contextualizing, and a driving force behind my career for a really long time, because I am a revolutionary, and until I started rewriting preventative health paradigms for governments, I didn't understand why I was in the health field. But it was only when it came in on a political economy level that it started making more sense. That truthfully, we have an ability as humanity right now to wake up collectively and to, take a big step forward for our entire community. And the quote that I would share is by Krishnamurti. I hear Imani. Imani, listen to this quote.
Oh, hold on. I'll put it. I've got headphones on. I'll put it on speaker, then she can hear it.
Okay, ready?
Good stuff for her to hear.
Everyone else, bring your children. Bring your children. Everyone got their kids?
Okay.
Or the 1.5 kids in the white picket fence. All right, so it's by Jiddu Krishnamurti. All right, the quote is, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society."
Yeah.
It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And so when we feel the effect of this Maori call, that is one of, let's say, the most well-known now ceremonial indigenous practices in the world, right? I think a video circulated a few years ago about a Kiwi wedding, and the men in suits, all the best men, came forward and did the haka, and it was just this earth bone shattering experience to witness that togetherness, to witness that sense of purpose and that trust, and of course then vibration and how that directs our blood flow, how it resynchronizes our brainwave states. Imani wants to do the haka. That it's a huge awakening of that trust, which we as modern humanity have lost.
Yeah.
Mama.
Yeah, mama. All right, well, Luz, I mean, we're at that mark where I don't want to keep it too long for the listeners. And what I do know is that I want to have an episode 2, because we didn't even get into the mechanics of medicine.
I know.
So what do you think about, we'll call it a day for now. Any last thoughts for the audience?
My last thoughts for the audience are to say that if you're interested in plants, and if you have an inkling about plants, then to follow that inkling. And one way in which you might be able to do that is through my online herb learning course, which is launching 19th of August. And it is primarily about connecting through herbs, through this embodied approach, this sensory tea tasting, which is a really unique and radical way to really reconnect with yourself and to learn about plants. So it's a win-win situation, but trust your gut, don't, and we have to be really careful about what that is and what that means. But when you know it and when you feel it, you will know.
Mm-hmm.
So go with it.
I love it. All right, so many more explorations. We'll talk about herbal medicine as it is in another podcast. Clearly, this was one of the hero's journey in returning to trust. All of the answers, and I love it. So thank you for everyone listening, and thank you, Lucy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Give a kiss to Imani.
Mwah! And one back.
Mwah.
Okay.
How was listening to that for you? If you learned from or were moved by the episode, pay it forward. Go to Apple now and leave a 5-star review so others can benefit. Join the Institute for Aliveness for a 1-week transformational fasting experience. Consider getting an astrology reading from Andy, or enroll in the 1-year health coach certification course. Whatever you do, don't let this learning pass you by. Do something now to impact your lifestyle for good.